We are recording. Everyone, welcome to our week 12 live classroom. If you're here and watching this, congratulations. You've made it through the majority of the course. But let's dive in. Do we have any questions from week 11?
It's
Any
not for
questions at all?
11, but I have a question about the exam, because I'm afraid I'll forget by the end of the lesson. So
Oh,
it
okay.
shows that it opens on the 22nd and closes on the 23rd. So we only have 2 days to do the exam.
That does sound right. Yep, if that's what iLearn says, then that's correct. Yeah, and if anyone has scheduling conflicts for whatever reason, if you guys are like, if someone's like giving birth on that day or whatever, like just let me know and we can work around that. But outside of anything crazy like that, so yeah, just try to do it in that time frame. So, any other questions? James, welcome by the way. Good to have you.
Thanks.
All right. In that case, I wanted to share something that one of your fellow classmates asked about the loan calculator. Okay, so I had the question that was asked was in regards to rounding. Apparently, there were a couple of chunks of code that were extremely similar, made by various students, that gave very close outcomes, but not quite exact. And I wanted to talk about those. So the student that emailed me said that this piece of code was perfect in generating the correct outcome. And then their piece of code was perfect according to the autograder, but generating a little bit different outcome. And you can see here that with the numbers that I put in, the number or the compute payment, the monthly payment, was the same in both of these, 53.03. And the payments made to, or the outcome, or the final payoff amount for this one had 66 cents, and this one had 67 cents. Okay, so really close. But I wanted to look at this for two reasons. One, to look at rounding stuff and just kind of review this assignment with you guys real quick. And the other also to debug these together, get some debugging practice, and show you how I went about finding the difference here. I would have you know, this one's mine, and my outcome was the same as this one here, the one whose student thought that they had it incorrect. So without any further ado, let's bust open our tools here. In both of these, blow them up a bit, make sure that this one's open too. Any questions? Did that make sense, everything that I was just saying up to this point? Okay, sweet. If anyone sees their code in here, I hope you're not offended that I'm sharing it with the class. All right, so I have put a breakpoint after the compute balance function in both of these, so I can see what this payoff is. Okay, and here's why. The compute payment gives the exact same result in all three of these programs, mine and the two students. Okay, so I know that compute payment is the same across the board with all three of these programs. So I want to see what compute balance is getting. And so I have a breakpoint inside of compute balance here. And I think I'm actually going to take it out. For the moment, let's just see what it's actually getting for us. So we have compute balance, put a breakpoint after it. I'm going to take this breakpoint out, and then I'm going to take that one out and have compute balance. Where is compute balance in this one? Right here. Okay, so let's look at this. So I'm not going to have a breakpoint stop in compute payment just on this one. I'm going to compute the balance, the payoff amount. Okay, and this one, it says $4,837.67. And notice that this is a string. Okay, and then this other one, if I push the same button, same numbers are in here, and I look here, it has basically the same number, but obviously it hasn't been rounded yet, and it is a number. Okay, now I looked into this a little bit the other day with a different question asked. This toFixed function, which was previously called in this one right here, where we have this string, if I Google this, Okay, so I'm just going to copy this and say JavaScript. Oh, there. Two fixed. If we look at this in W3 schools, we can read something very interesting about this. So we know it's going to round. But where did it say? Let's see, I'm going to cheat here and type it in. Was it here that I saw it? Oh, this isn't the right one. Where to? JavaScript to fixed. Sorry, guys. I should have had this opened. Okay, so this is the to fixed. I don't know where that other page went. All right, and if I look here, right here, the to fixed method converts a number into a string, keeping a specified number of decimals. Okay, so if I run this right here, actually we won't be able to see it here. So let's look in our console here. Let's just run this. If I have var some number equals 503 point some decimal, and if I say var some string equals some number dot to fixed, and then I'll say 2. Okay, we'll run this to 2 decimal points. Now notice what some string is. Okay, we have a string rounded to 2 decimals. Okay, similar to what we saw here. Okay, this compute balance return this string with 2 decimal points here. Okay, so that is one difference in the two programs here, is that this one with the to fixed return a string with 2 decimals like they had intended, and that's not an issue. We can always convert this back into a string. If I type in here JavaScript convert string to a number, okay, that's what we've been doing with like parse ints and parse floats. That's exactly how we parse or convert strings back to numbers, so it's not an issue. But the reason why this program here had the 0.67 and mine and the other students had 0.66 was because when this compute balance was returned, it returned a rounded number, okay? And then when it came into here, that number was already rounded, and that's not an issue, but that was the reason why these two are different. Whereas this one has the to fixed right when we're displaying it to the user. And the reason why this is important is because if I look at this program right here, I should be able to call do balance, call do payment. Actually, sorry, I should be able to call compute balance and compute payment as many times as I want without having to worry about not getting exact values. Where these values right here are being rounded inside of these functions, this may make them a little less reusable. Imagine if I had a bank and I had to get the statistics for the average monthly payments for all of my clients or something like that. If I'm rounding it inside of this compute payment function, then my number will be off. Whereas if I loop through all of my clients without rounded values, and then I add them and then I round it, that will be an accurate rounding. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so long story short, after all my rambling, that's the difference, okay? This program right here was rounding it inside of their compute functions, whereas the other one was rounding it right as they displayed it to the output, which is perfect, okay? They are both good, okay? I think it's awesome that any rounding was taking place in both of these programs, so nice work to both of you. But that is the difference, and that is why if I let these go, this came up with 66 cents, and this other one came up with 67 cents. And like I said, it's a really small difference, but the principle is, this is a relatively simple mathematic program that we wrote, and if we had it to be more complex or we had more data that we were analyzing, this would compound. It might not be a difference of 1 cent, it might be a difference of 5 or 10 cents, or even more. So, any questions about this? Okay. All right. Well, if there aren't any questions, I'm hoping that the questions that were previously addressed to me were answered. So yeah, you guys are good with this then? No questions? Okay, sounds good. By the way, I was looking through the peer review discussion boards and all of your assignment submissions, and you guys are rocking it. You guys, I think, have grasped these concepts better than any class I've taught previously, so good for you guys. All right, we didn't have any questions about last week's assignment, so if you do and you watch this video and you still do, just let me know. So without any further ado, let's dive into arrays. Okay, I've mentioned arrays several times in this class before. I love arrays. There are endless things that you can do with them. So what is an array? It is a collection of variables, and each variable in the array is accessible within that array. So let's say I had a collection of data. Okay, let's go back to my bank, and I had a bunch of clients, and I wanted to get their average monthly payments. Okay, if I had an array with all of that data in it, so I could see each monthly payment, $200, $300, $100, I could take that array and just loop through it, getting the sum of each element in that array, and then doing any math that I wanted to on it, like dividing it by the length of the array, for example. Okay, that's one example, but arrays are extremely versatile. I could store numbers in here to do math with. I could store strings in here to do concatenation with. I could store entire objects here to display the name of the client and their total loan amount or something for every single client that I have. If I had an object with the name and their total loan amount. So arrays are extremely versatile. You will notice that in JavaScript, an array can contain any variation of data types. And what I mean by that is, let me open up these developer tools again. So if I say var test array equals this, okay, that's how you declare an array, just with an opening and closing bracket. Okay, if I type in test array now, you can see I just have an empty array here. See, the length is 0. The data type is array. Okay. If I say test array dot push, okay, this is a function that's built into JavaScript for adding things to the end of an array. Basically, appending to an array, you add another index to the array with a new value at that index. Okay, so if I say test array dot push, and I'll just say 50. Okay, you can see it outputted 1, which you wouldn't do this in a program, but if I say test array now, you can see I have one element in this array, which is 50. If I look here, the length is now 1. Okay, if I say test array dot push, and I'll just say 16, you can see it says 2. It's outputting our length, and you can see I have an array with 2 values in it of 50 and 16, because those are the 2 values that I added to our array. Okay, so these are 2 numbers. All right, I could loop through it and add them together, do any type of math that I wanted to. But look at this. I can say test array dot push. My name is Nathan. Whoops. Okay, and if I say test array to see what's in here, that's a completely different data type. If I tried to loop through it, adding numbers, I would end up with a not a number error, because the string is not a number that could be added to these numbers. I could do string concatenation, and it would turn the 50 and the 16 into strings. But just so you guys know, you can have different data types in arrays in JavaScript. Many languages don't support this. You'd have to declare what type of array it's going to be, whether it's an array of a number or a string or a specific type of object. Yeah, just so you know. Any questions about this? Okay. My little 2 cents is I do not recommend this ever. Okay, I would recommend having an array of numbers or an array of strings or an array of client objects, whatever you want, but I would make your array as consistent as possible. If you have different types of data that you need to be put in the array, that is when you would declare an object for those different types of data. And we'll go into that more throughout the rest of the semester, but let's go ahead and move forward. So, declaring, creating, and populating arrays. So, you can declare a variable name, array name, in this example, and I just declared it, and JavaScript has no idea what the variable type is. It doesn't hold a value, but I can assign it a new array by saying the keyword new array and then a size. So right here, this example, I say var scores equals new array with the size of 25. Okay, if I did this right now, let's say var new array equals, var scores equals new array of 25. Let's see what this gives us. If I say scores, you can see it recognizes that it's an array with a length of 25, but it says empty times 25 because I haven't put anything into my array. Okay, so if you need to declare an array with a fixed number of indices of locations in that array of spaces, this will declare it and allocate all of that space into memory. Okay, it will reserve that space in memory so that you can assign whatever you want to it. And then if you wanted to populate that array, you could isolate an individual index with the square brackets and then the index number, and then assign a value to it. Okay, so if I come into here and I was like scores, and let's just use 0 equals 50, just like that did, and I type in scores now, you can see the first index here, the index of 0, has the value of 50, and then there's another 24 empty slots. Okay, if I said scores, and let's just say like 15 equals 12, then I type in scores, and you can see it still counts the number of empty slots between each one. The 15th element in the array has the value of 12 that I just assigned it. Okay, now doing this isn't super common. It is one way to populate an array, but there are easier ways to do it. Now, for example, you saw I used array.push, okay, and I just like added elements onto the end of my array. So if I knew that I had a bunch of clients or students or whatever that I wanted to add their loan amounts to, I could just push onto a new array. I could declare a new array and then push onto it every time I loop through or something like that. Okay. And then another way to declare, assign, and populate an array is by doing this. Okay, I didn't say new array anywhere. If you remember a minute ago when I declared my array in the console, I just did it with an opening and closing square bracket. This is the same concept, this last line right here, but it's also populated with 5 different values. Okay, and so if I did that in here, let me clear this real quick. Var new array, that's confusing. I'll say numbers equals, and I can say 5, 14 to 5 point whatever, and I can declare array like that. And if I type it out, you can see I have an array with these different indexes right here in purple. The value held at each one of those indices are on the right, and the length is 4. Okay, and all of that was with one line of code. So that is another way to declare and populate an array if you know exactly what values you need in there. Any questions about any of these? Okay. All right, array length. All right, I showed you guys a second ago that I can open up this array and kind of see what's inside of it. I can see each element that's in it, and I can also see that there's this built-in length attribute that basically just tells me how long my array is. Now, that might not sound very useful, but let's say I had 30 clients and I had to check to see what all of their loan balances were. It'd be hard to loop through that if I didn't know the number 30. It'd be hard to tell JavaScript, hey, loop through this until you don't find any more. It'd be easiest to be like, okay, my array.length is a set value for my array, and I will loop through until I reach that number. Okay, so right here, if I wanted to loop through this array, I would just say, while I is less than 4, if I is equal to 0, while I is less than 4, loop through. Okay, and so this length is super helpful. I could also use it to say, if I was displaying on the page to a user, I could say, hey, these are all of your users that have a loan. Let's say I loop through all of our users, and if they had a loan, I would add them to an array. I could use array.length to say, hey, this is how many there were. So that's what length does. There's lots of different things that you can use it for, but it's extremely useful for loops. Okay. All right, any questions about this? About length or anything to this point? Sweet. All right, so accessing data in an array. We've already looked at this a little bit. This is straight from our developer tools, the screenshot that I took. But I wanted to show you guys the difference between the indices in an array and the value that the index holds at each index, okay? So if I am debugging, let's open up a program here real quick. We are in chapter 10. Let's open up this. Okay, there's an array here. This is perfect. Copy this file path, and let's run this. Mother's Day, we don't really care what it is. We just want to look at the array. Sources, we are going to put a breakpoint right here and debug this. So I hit my button. If I hover over this, similar to what we saw in the console, we have these different values in the array. We have the length of the array. And if I wanted to access these different values, notice that when I declared the array and populated it on line 23, I have 1908, 5, 10. Okay, inserting 3 values into the array. Each one of them will be placed at a unique index that will be accessible to you later on as a developer. And so in here, if I wanted to access that 1908, I would have to say, array bracket bracket with the 0 in the middle to access that. All right, and if we look at this, all of these on the left, again, are unique indices. And these will always just be numbered from 0 up to however many you have. And then the values at each of these, they can be the same. It doesn't matter what is at these values, but it is the index that will be unique. And it is the index that you will be able to access like this, with the square braces, with the index number inside of the square brace. Okay. Any questions about this?
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it, Emily.
Trying to think, but I might not be wording this very correctly, but if I wanted to access like the last index or the last value of my array, then what could I just do, like the name of the array dot length -1, and then that would access it?
That is exactly how you do it.
Okay.
That is a very common thing that you'll need to do as well. So let's try that real quick. So if I have, let's just spit out a couple variables here just so we can see what's going on. So I'll say array length equals mday array dot length. Okay, we know that this dot length is in here. Okay, we can see it when we looked at it in here. We can see this length attribute that is available to us. Okay, now length is going to be 3. All right, we just saw it in here. Length is 3, but our last index is 2, and that's because arrays are 0 based. They'll always start at 0. So, like Emily said, to get our last index, that would be array length -1. Okay, because this guy will give us 3. This will subtract 1 from that, making it 2, which will be the last element in the array. Okay, so this is our index right here, our last index. And if I say var last value, we'll say, I can say mday array last index. Okay, and that would be the exact same thing as saying var last value equals mday array, and then we have mday array dot length -1. Okay, let's debug this real quick, and we'll just step through this so we can see everything that's going on. All right, so we declare our array, same as before. We have our 3 elements in it. Our length of 3, greatest index is 2. So array length gives us 3. All right, that's the exact same thing as just saying array.length. And then array length -1 will give us 2. And then right here, I can hover over this array again and see what it is. And if I highlight from the beginning of the array to the end of the closing bracket, right here, I can see that will be 10. Notice last index is 2. And if I highlight over this entire thing, it'll tell me what will be computed here, and that's 10. It's giving me the value of the last index of the array, which is 2. All right, so 10 will be assigned over here to last value, which is perfect. That's what we wanted. And then also, this is just another way to write it. It'd be the exact same thing, because mday array.length is 3, minus 1 will be 2, which is the exact same thing as last index in here. So that'll be the exact same thing. Okay, great question, Emily. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. All right. Yeah, you won't need anything like that on your assignment this week. Okay, let's keep going. Loops and arrays. I keep on talking about loops, so let's do it a little bit more. So this loop will get a comma delimited list from the user. Okay, so let's say we have an input from the user. If we wanted them to type in an array, we could prompt them to type in like a comma delimited list, for example. User string.split, we've seen split before. If I wanted to look more into it, I could just type in JavaScript split. And we can see that it's used to split a string. And I can split it by any character that I want to. Okay, for this one, it's splitting it by these spaces. And for this example here, we're splitting it by a comma. All right, and then the output of that, of string.split, is an array. If I come back here and look at this, the split method is used to split a string into an array of substrings and returns the new array. Okay, so we get our array, var array, after splitting this, and we won't have any of the commas included. That character is completely destroyed out of this thing. It's not included, but the substrings in between each comma will be included. And those will be the unique elements. Well, not necessarily unique. Those will be the elements inside of our array. And then we can loop through our array and output that. All right. So do you guys have any questions about this concept?
I do.
Yeah, go for it, Garrett.
Can you demonstrate it really quick?
Yeah, let's do it. I wonder if I have an example in here. I do not. So let's write it out real quick. All right. I'm just going to grab my template program and paste it in here. In here, let's just write this out real quick. So get element by ID, we're going to prompt the user to type in a comma delimited list. We can just leave this input ID here, leave this here, and we'll have this be called user string. And then we'll say var array equals user string dot split. We're going to split it by a comma. And then we're going to have our loop. So for I equals 0, while I is less than array dot length I plus plus. All right. And then in here, in this example, what it's doing is it's just parsing the numbers that were put into here, and it will convert these strings into numbers. But what I'm going to do, we're going to declare this message first as an empty string. And we're just going to say message plus equals array at the index of I. Now notice I is declared as 0. Can you guys see this okay? Notice I is declared as 0, which will always be the first index of an array. And then while it's less than array.length, we'll increment I. So with our Mother's Day example, our array was a length of 3 with the indices going from 0 to 1 to 2. Okay, so this right here, this would continue from 0 to 1 to 2. So this is really nice with arrays, because if you just start your loop with a 0, then you can always use array.length. I is less than array.length, and it'll go through every element in your array. And then here, we're just going to add whatever was there onto our message, and we'll just add a break. Whoops. So it's easy to see what's going on. And we'll output our message. So I'm going to copy this file path, paste it in here, close this for a sec. If I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and some string, and I run our function, you can see it split this up into an array. And then it printed each one of them back into a string, but we can do lots of stuff with these. Notice I decided not to parse this in this example like I did in this screenshot that I took. And that's because we didn't have any error checking. If the user typed in a string, for example, like I just did, that would throw an error or just output not a number. So if you did something like this, you would want some type of logic to make sure that the value of array at index of I is actually a number that you can parse. Okay. For this example, we're not parsing it. Let's go ahead and put a breakpoint in here. Let's see how this is working. So I'll run our function. User string, exactly what I typed in. Now let's look at what happens when we do this split right here. Okay, that's pretty slick. All right, it turned all of them into strings, which is why the other example was parsing them. But we have a beautiful array here with that we can do a bunch of stuff with. Okay, if we need to do math, if we need to check for the length of a string or check for a certain piece of data inside of a barcode that was scanned, like there's a lot of things that you can do with this after you have your data in this way. Okay, message we declare as just an empty string. Array.length is 8, and if we look at array, the last element in here is 7. Okay, so we'll loop from 0 to 7. While I is less than array.length, we'll increment I. That's perfect. And then if I highlight this from the closing bracket to the beginning of the array name, you can see it gets the value of 1, which if I look at array, that's this guy right here. All right, and that's because I is currently 0. So we'll add that onto message, just like this. Then if I keep on looping, you can see that just keeps on getting added to message. And then once this string is rendered in the HTML, it'll actually use a break instead of just typing out break. Okay. Any questions about this? And Garrett, did that answer your question? Did that help?
Yeah, I think I'm getting that part. I was just wondering about the split method.
Okay. Yeah. So for our example right here, we had all these commas, and what the split does is it takes the commas out, and everything between them is put into a new index in the array. So if I run this function again, you can see user string was right here as a string with a bunch of commas in it. And then array took all the commas out, and everything outside of the commas was put into its own element. And the example that W3 Schools used was, how are you doing today? And it decided to split it by the space. And what that'll look like is it just took out all the spaces and it looks like it replaced it with commas. Interesting. But the split itself won't replace anything. It'll just turn it into an array. Oh, that's why it printed the array. And that's what it looks like when you printed the array without any type of formatting. But that's an array data type. And so similar to, you know, when we were messing around with the console, and I said var test array equals that. If I just print that, you know, that's the way that it's printed. And if I printed that to an HTML page, then this is what it would look like. Okay. So it just takes out whatever character you're splitting it by, and it splits all those into new elements inside the array that you're making. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, awesome. All right, any other questions about this? Okay, then let's move on. So filling an array, so we filled an array earlier, just declaring an array and populating it as we declared it. I showed you guys array.push, which will just add a new index, a new space, and a new value to your array, whatever you're pushing to it. So this right here, I'm declaring a new array, and if you guys remember, when you do this, you end up with an array, in this case with 80 open spots with nothing in it. All right, and so right here, I'm calling a function called fill. I pass in my array, and I pass in a number. Now in this example, I take my array list right here, and I loop through it using list.length, and then x will be 7. That's what was passed in as the second parameter. Okay, and so in this case, we're going to loop through list.length, which will be 80, and then every single time we're going to put x in at that unique index. Okay, so the unique index will start off at 0, and then it'll be 1, then 2, then 3, all the way up to 79, which will be the complete length of the array. And every single time we're going to put in 7. All right, so let's look at this example. Let's type this out real quick. So I have var list equals new array of 80. Whoops. And then fill list with the number 7. All right, and I'm going to declare function fill list and x. And in here I'll say for var I equals 0, I is less than list.length, I plus plus. And then list at the index of I, whatever it's at during the loop, equals x, which will always be 7. All right. And then just for kicks, let's return list, and we're going to print that to our page. So I can delete all this. Okay, so by giving it a return value, I'm just returning the array, and I just assign that return value to our inner HTML to print it. Okay, so let's come back over here, let that go, and refresh it. All right, I'm going to put a breakpoint right there. Actually, I'm going to put one right there too. All right, we don't need our input. We're not using it. We made a new array, a big old empty array. That's why it says a 0 right here, because there's nothing there. But the length is 80. All right. So that's what it looks like when we declared this new array. If I hit F8, I will jump to my next breakpoint. So inside of our function fill, we have our empty array, and we have x, which is 7, the number that we passed in to fill our array with. Okay, list.length is 80. List itself has 80 open spots in it. The first time we loop through, I is 0. And so if I isolate that index in the array, it's currently undefined, and I will assign it the value of x. So now if I look at array, we have one value in here at the index of 0 with the value of 7. Okay. If I go a little bit further, I'm just going to hit F10 a bunch of times. If I look at list now, you can see we've looped through another 4 times, and each time we're just assigning that index the value of 7. And this will happen every single time until we're ready to print it out on the page in this terribly ugly way. Okay. All right. Any questions about this? Okay. So I've brought up loop several times. Being able to do something like this in a loop is extremely effective, and the possibilities, like the use cases for it, are seriously endless. If I had a bunch of clients with loans or something like that, and I wanted to figure out if people had greater loans in Idaho than in Washington, I could loop through, and for everyone, I could check to see if they're in Washington or in Idaho, and if they are, I'd add them to a new array or something like that. And here's how I could do that, exactly like this. Okay. All right, let's keep going. So summing the values of an array, we declare just an open variable, just number, declaring it as 0 up front. And then as we loop through a list, however many it is, I can add to that number, okay, using this plus equals operator. Now, it's been a little while since we've seen this, but if you guys think back, that plus equals operator would be the exact same thing as saying, look at all these errors in Google Docs. This is terrible. So if I said var x equals 0 and x plus equals 1, x is now 1. Okay, or I could say x equals x plus 1. It's the exact same thing. Okay, so this is just shorthand for doing this, but this is how I could easily get the sum of an entire list. I just loop to the entire list. For each element in the list, I will add that value to my sum, and then I can return the sum of that list. Okay, any questions here? All right. finding a specific value in an array. So here we have some logic. We have a nice, beautiful if statement here with our is equal to operator. So I can pass in a list into this function along with a key. Now a key is a common term in programming. Anytime you have like a key value pair, you'll have a key that you can find a value by. Okay, so with our arrays, the key would always be the index of that array. Whatever index I'm trying to isolate, that's the key. Okay, if I look back at this guy, I could see all these unique indices. These are each key value pairs. 0 is the key, 5 is the value. 1 is the key, 3 is the value. So key is a very common term in programming. And so I can search in here, pass in an array along with a key that I want to isolate. I loop through the array, and when the value of list at index of I is equal to the key that I passed in, we're going to return that index. Okay, and if it wasn't found, we'll return -1 just to say, hey, it wasn't found. Okay, any questions about this? Does this make sense? Okay, hopefully it makes sense. Notice here it says this is a linear search. This function name is linear search. A linear search is when you just go from the bottom to the top. You look for an array, or you look for a value in an array, and you just keep on going until you find it. There are other types of searches. There's like a binary search and other things like that, which can actually perform better. They require a little bit more logic. But for example, instead of just searching from index of 0 up to the length of the array, it would basically search for that value like at the middle. And if it was lesser than it, then it would go to the middle of, like if I was searching an array from 1 to 100, I would check at index 50 first, and then index 25 if it was lesser than, and then it would check to see if it was lesser than or greater than 25, and it would break it down, and it would loop a lot less potentially. But this is a very common linear search. All right, parallel arrays. Okay, in this array in these two arrays, I have an array of student IDs and corresponding student names. Okay, this can be extremely effective, but in the professional world, it's not extremely common to have parallel arrays. Okay, you can do it, and if you need to do it, that's totally fine. This is valid code. But a more effective way to do it would be to implement objects. Okay, but if you're only dealing with arrays, you can do this, and it can be extremely effective. If I have a unique ID of 1, and that's Jonathan, I can isolate any data of Jonathan, whether it's a student name array or a student ID array or a student address array, and be like, okay, student address at index of 1, that's Jonathan's address, okay, or that's Jonathan's student ID, okay, and I'll know that at index of 1, that's how I can access Jonathan's stuff. All right, and I could loop through these and say for each student name at their index, get their student ID or their student address or anything. Okay. Now, an example of this with an object. Let's see here. So if I said, let's just say I have a student object. Okay. In here, I can have an ID, let's say of 07153. Okay. And I could also have a name of Jonathan. All right. So I have this object, this beautiful student object, okay, that has the variable name of student. And then I can put these objects into an array. So if I did have something like that, let me just copy this a couple of times, show you guys a quick example, and then we'll move on. All right, let's say this guy had a different ID. That was Nathan, that was John, and that was Han. Okay, these names, that's going to give us a big old ugly error because we don't have variables with these names. We're going to have to put those as strings. And each one of these are going to need a unique variable name, otherwise they'll just get replaced. And now I could loop through this. I could put these in an array. I could say var student array equals, and I can put in these values just like I did the numbers before. Okay, let's run this real quick. You aren't expected to work with objects this week or next week, but I want you to know that they're here. Let's see, where's my error? Unexpected token, line 30. Oh, I wonder if it didn't like that I put these on new lines. All right, let's look at JavaScript object declaration. That looks strangely familiar to what we just tried. I didn't see anything different here. It's interesting.
You're missing the equal sign.
Good catch. All right. Let's undo all that, put it back to where it was. And for each one of these opening brackets, I'll hit Control D to select all of them and throw in an equal sign. Details. All right. So I'm going to run this function. We have a breakpoint in here, so I'll just hit F10. All right, you can see we have an object with an ID and a name. We're going to make 3 more objects. I can look at each one of these and see they're all very similar. And then in here, I can assign those to an array. And then in this array, I have an array of objects with accessible data in them. Okay, so the one option, I could have basically parallel arrays, an array of IDs, an array of names, any other type of data that the student could have. Address, phone number, tract, type of student, graduation date, anything. And I could either have parallel arrays for all of those, or I can have an object with every single piece of data for that student in a single object. And then as I loop through it, I could isolate or extract any piece of data that I need. All right, any questions on this or on parallel arrays? All righty, let's keep going. Object, wow, look at that. Okay, we didn't have any questions on objects, so let's skip ahead. Okay, so a couple of array methods. Oh, look at this, array.push. Okay, so there's one. I'm just going to open up this link here. By the way, this screenshot is from your book. See this beautiful white and black screenshot? That's straight from your book. Okay, so in here, where'd that go? Okay, I think that's the wrong link. I'm going to save this. Okay, so in here, we have all of these different methods, things that we can do with arrays, okay? One that we already used today is array.push, and that is to add a new element to the end of the array, which will, as we saw, it returns the new length. We have pop, which removes the last element of an array and returns that element. So let's say I wanted to get the last student in my array. I could say var student array.pop, or var last student equals student array.pop, and that would return that last student. There's array.map, which is a way to kind of filter through an array. There's last index of, there's shift and reserve and reverse for kind of changing the way that the array is organized. So reverse literally just reverses the elements in an array. Shift will remove the first element in the array and return that element. You know, so there's all these different methods that can be used. These are all built into JavaScript, and the way that we use them, similar to the way we use .push, is if you have an array var new array equals 1, 2. Okay, then I could say, I can type out new array to see what it looks like. And if I say new array dot reverse, you can see it just reversed my array. Okay, so where all these methods are built into JavaScript, anytime you have a variable with an array data type, you can use any one of these methods. Okay, and some of them take parameters, some of them don't. Reverse doesn't take any parameters, so I didn't put any in there. But you notice that some of these, let's see, like filter and find, those will require parameters. There's a number of these that do. So yeah, you guys can play with these if you want. Each one of these you can click on in W3 Schools and look at them and see what they do. You can type them in your console and play with them, just like we just did. You don't have to memorize these by any means. You will have to use several of them in this course and in life if you're ever doing any JavaScript development. But yeah, any questions about these? Okay, sweet. So, a couple of common mistakes. Forgetting that the first index in JavaScript is always 0. Okay, so a lot of people, instead of saying while I is less than array.length, they would say while I is less than or equal to array.length. That generates kind of a funny error that can be kind of hard to find if you don't know what you're looking for. Let's go ahead and look at that real quick. So we have our student array. Doesn't matter what's in the array, we're just going to loop through it. So if I say for var I equals 0, I is less than or equal to student array dot length I plus plus. Okay, now if we think about this, I is 0, well, it's less than or equal to student array dot length. Whoops, that would give me an error. So we have student, student 1, 2, and 3. Our length will be 3, okay? And this will loop, let's see, it'll be 0, 1, 2. So let's run this real quick. Gonna let that go. Refresh our page and put, let's see, our x equals temp. Just that there's something in here so we can actually stop it. Breakpoint right there and another one right there. Run this. Okay, student array length is 4. The last index is 3. And we're going to loop through until I is equal to 4. Okay, so I will be 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. It'll loop through 5 times. And you know, I'm just going to let this go. You can see we got this big old red error. List isn't defined. That's fine. But what this will do is it will try to get something that last time that we loop, and there won't be anything in the array. If you're trying to get a piece of data out of the array at an index that doesn't exist, you'll get a big old error saying this doesn't exist. Okay, and so this is a very common mistake. Be sure to remember that arrays are always 0-based, and so the length will always be 1 greater than your last index. Okay, so that's this example right here, going beyond the length of an array. Using right here, less than or equal to array.length. That will go beyond the length of the array, giving you an error. You won't be able to assign this right here, it'll give you an error. So another common one is confusing an index with the value stored at an index. Okay, so remember, left column is the index. All these are the unique indices of the array. They will always be incrementing numbers, 0 to whatever the length of the array is. And those will always be unique. You'll never have 2 indices with the same index. That would defeat the purpose of having an index. But their values can be the same. It doesn't matter what's in their values. I could have the exact same thing. We printed off an array of 80 number 7s. It doesn't matter what the value is. The index is the unique one. And so this example right here, it shows while I is less than array.length, and then it will have the sum plus equals I. Okay, if you're trying to get the sum of an array, this will add up the sum of the indices, okay? Because right here, we're just looping through, I is starting at 0, and I will go until the end of the array. But the correct way to do it would be to say the value of the array at index of I, okay, by using these square brackets. All right. Any questions about any of this stuff? Or anything, because that's all I have for you guys today. Any questions?
I have one question, and it's about the end of the chapter. There's an example of the sort function, and then it says you may be wondering how the sort function works, and then there's a desk check, and I was just trying to walk myself through it to understand how the sort function works, but I just couldn't comprehend it. So could you walk us through the sort function, like how it works?
Yeah, do you want to look at it in the book or in W3 Schools?
In the book, please.
Let's do it. All right, where is our book? Two functions that use arrays. Oh, I'm in assignments, preparation. Chapter 10, arrays. Which example was it, Emily?
Example 25.
Okay.
I think.
Okay. Example 25, sort. Okay, sorts the contents of the specified array in ascending order using the insertion sort algorithm. All right. Remember wondering how the sort function works? There are many different well-known sort algorithms. They all work by repeatedly comparing elements in an array. All right, so right here, let's look at this real quick. This function, I'm trying to think what the best way to explain this is. So the sort function in JavaScript that's like linked to arrays. Let's go back and see if we can find it. The wrong one. All right, so we have sort. So this function can indeed just have like a default sort without any parameters, okay? In this example, we can imagine it'll probably just sort it alphabetically. However, we can insert an entire function into the parameter of this sort, okay? For example, let's say I wanted to sort something by let's say like descending numerical order, odd numbers first and then even numbers after all the odd numbers are listed. Like that'd be possible. If I put that into a function, then I could use that function as a parameter inside of sort and sort it by that. And the way that would work is every time it gets to a value in your array, it will run that function and it will compare the values around that index of wherever it's at in your array. Wherever it's looping through, it will loop through it for you and it will check to compare the values on each side of it of every element in that array. And it will sort it by whatever you're telling it to sort by. So in this example right here, you can see it sorts the contents in ascending order using the insertion sort algorithm. So we have our first equals 0, last equals list.length minus 1. Okay, we're good till now. Var I equals last minus 1, while I is greater than or equal to first, I minus minus. Okay, so this is going to loop through the entire array in reverse order. Okay, that's what they've set up here. Okay, they declared I as 1 less than the last index of the array, and then while it's greater than or equal to first, which will be 0, we'll decrement I. So we'll loop through the entire array going backwards. Var swap is whatever is at this point in the array, okay, at the unique index of I. We'll isolate that value and assign it to swap. And then we have another for loop here. J is equal to I plus 1. J is less than or equal to last, J plus plus. So we're going to loop through the entire thing going up. And then swap, if swap is less than or equal to list at the index of J, we'll break. Okay, and if it's not, then we're going to assign that value to this index. So what this is doing is it's showing us how we could programmatically sort without using like the JavaScript sort object, but this is how, or the sort function, but this is how it does it. It will sort through every single thing in that array, and this is the work that it does for you. Like this is exactly the work that it does for you. It will loop through every single item in that array that you're passing in or that you're calling the sort function on, and it will compare the values around that index to see if it's greater than or lesser than, depending on how you're wanting to sort. And so you will never need to write this out ever. This is showing you how you could write it out if you wanted to, but it is the exact same thing that, where did it go? That this does, that this function does. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah, I misunderstood your question at first, which is why I went into like the JavaScript sort method parameters and stuff, which you don't have to worry about right now. But yeah, all right,
Yeah,
great question.
Yeah, I think for me, it was just, I just kept reading over that part and trying to do the desk check myself, and I just wasn't understanding what's happening, but it makes more sense now.
Okay, awesome. Let's see, any other questions about this or about anything else? Were there any questions about the exam? Were you guys good there? Alrighty, well, then I think we'll call it a day. Next week will be our last official live classroom. I'll still be available to meet one-on-one if anyone would like, but next Tuesday is going to be our last one. I won't hold one on week 14 when you guys will take the exam. But yeah, so thank you all for coming, and please let me know if you guys have any questions this week.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
thank you
you.
guys. Have a great day, everyone. All right, bye.